Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy.
Day one, it's going to be about, one, implementing my plan for what I call an opportunity economy. I've already laid out a number of proposals in that regard, which include what we're going to do to bring down the cost of everyday goods, what we're going to do to invest in America's small businesses, what we're going to do to invest in families, for example, extending the child tax credit to $6,000 for families for the first year of their child's life to help them buy a car seat, to help them buy baby clothes, a crib. There's the work that we're going to do that is about investing in the American family around affordable housing, a big issue in our country right now. So there are a number of things on day one. I'm talking about an era that started about a decade ago, where there is some suggestion, warped I believe it to be, that the measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down, instead of where I believe most Americans are, which is to believe that the true measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you lift up. That's what's at stake as much as any other detail that we could discuss in this election.
Well, that was Vice President Kamala Harris last night in her much-anticipated first interview. This was with CNN. And you know what? She nailed it. She nailed it. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. I'm very excited today for our guest, Andrew Weissmann. We shall chat with Andrew in just a second. But first, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So here's some feedback we've gotten in the past week. On our conversation with the Five's Jessica Tarlov, Jeffrey DeLander writes, "The voice of reason on an otherwise monolithic sound machine of the Five. Long live Jessica T." Jamal writes, "Perfect Jessica as always." And Daniel Diardine writes, "The lone voice of reason on the Five." On our conversation with Stephanie Grisham, Kathy Kaplaner writes, "Great interview. Being brave for freedom." Eric Johnson writes, "She is one of the few people from his administration that literally came out right away and said, 'This man is crazy. He's dangerous. And America would pay a heavy price should they put him back in office.' Bravo, Stephanie." And for some shameless self-promotion, Tanya Oliver writes, "Andy, all the way from Australia, we love your podcast. Great guests. It's full of facts, political information, laughs, and hard truths. I personally find it refreshing that you say exactly how it is and how you feel without holding back. You say it with passion and concern for your country." Oh, Tanya, I do not hold back. And Mandy writes, "I love listening to the Back Room with Andy Ostroy. The down-to-earth style feels more like you've been invited to a conversation versus observing an interview. Fantastic guests, great host, and interesting topics all keep me coming back." Oh, Mandy.
Oh, Mandy.
Mandy, you came and you gave without taking. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who listens and to everybody who writes. Don't forget, stick around to the end for another thrilling episode of Just Jeff with Jen Hammoud's dad, Jeff. All right, let's get into the big things of the week. Let's start with Donald Trump and Arlington.
I was asked to be there by the parents and by the relatives. And I went there for the parents and the relatives. And while I was there, I didn't ask for a picture. While I was there, they said, "Sir, could we have a picture at the grave? You have the tombstone. You have the name of the tombstone." They're crying. They died because of incompetent leadership of Harris and Biden. They said, "Sir, could we have a picture?" I said, "Yes." All of a sudden, I hear that it's some kind of a PR thing. It's a disgrace.
Look, I don't know who that camera crew was. I looked over and they were in the car with us. So we walked in with them. I didn't know we were going to shoot and film things. It just happened.
Can you believe this guy?
No.
No.
Can you believe how bad my Trump impression is?
Yes.
It's getting there.
It's not getting there. But seriously, it's like you brought a fucking camera crew. You were told by the cemetery staff not to do anything with that camera crew when you arrived. They specifically said to you, Sir, you can't shoot. You cannot take photographs. And what did you do? You did it anyway. That's what's disgraceful.
And disrespectful.
I mean, when I first saw that image of him standing at a gravesite with his thumbs up and that dopey-ass smile on his face like he was standing outside the fucking Statue of Liberty like a tourist, like, I got physically ill. And when he says things like, I was invited there. Okay, that's great. You were invited there. That doesn't mean once you're there, you could do whatever you want and break not only the cemetery's rules, but the federal government's laws. It is against the law to do what he did.
Well, fortunately, we have so many, patriotic Republicans who came out against this act and, really showed what true American democracy is about.
And you just showed us what true American sarcasm is about. Because none of them did that. Not one.
What?
Well, in fact, the Speaker of the House apparently smoothed things over to have this take place.
Yeah. And then when you think about the confrontation, the altercation, the shoving of a cemetery staffer who is now terrified of being outed because Trump and his cultists are dangerous and make death threats.
They already attacked her. They called her mentally unstable. Yeah. They said she started the altercation. I want to know, what was the Secret Service doing when they were there protecting the president? They're federal witnesses to this.
And then one of the people involved was Chris Lasavito, who's like the campaign manager.
Well, I mean,
you can't. Can you imagine when in history could you have ever thought like a presidential nominee and his co-campaign manager would get involved in something like
well,
this?
considering his last campaign manager was arrested and charged with espionage with the Russians, essentially.
Oh, Maddie.
I don't know.
You're so technical.
But if you could put on your MAGA hat for a minute and say this was a Democrat who did it, like, what would you be saying right now? What would you be saying?
Stolen valor. Stolen valor.
I'd be saying, like, resign. Prosecute. He broke the law. And I don't know. I'm speechless. I'm not usually speechless, but like he manages to somehow make me speechless.
He never surprises me
just when I
anymore.
think like there's nothing else he could do. Arlington?
Look,
Arlington?
He sees this as a winning campaign strategy to blame them for the deaths of the soldiers in Afghanistan, and he'll stop at nothing to win this campaign.
Well, he had quite a busy week. Must have been hundreds of reposts and tweets and postings on Truth Social. He wants
a lot of truth.
Military tribunals for Liz Cheney and Barack Obama, reposting QAnon slogans. The thing he said about Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton, about blowjobs, that it's fascinating how blowjobs play an important role in both of their lives, implying that Kamala Harris slept her way to the top. I mean, he is just so fucking vile. I mean, there were none of words.
But we know what's on his mind.
There were not. Yeah.
Do you think he was on the toilet while he was posting truths? I mean, that's his...
He was his wish list.
But yet then you watch... I want to ask you guys what you thought of the interview last night with CNN, Kamala Harris. You watch this interview and like, he gets to sit on a toilet and tweet about blowjobs but like we obsess and dissect every syllable of Kamala's views on fracking. Like, what world are we living in?
No, I thought Dana Bash was okay, but didn't do a great job. I thought Kamala did a fantastic job, actually. I thought Walz did a great job. Some of the questions were whatever. I guess she felt she had to ask these stupid questions like the ones you just mentioned. And yet, of course, Trump never gets questions about things that are a thousand times worse than anything they've ever done.
Look, I like Dana Bash. I think she's a great journalist. I think she was in a very difficult spot because on the one hand, you get accused of like, she sounded like she was just reading, questions that were presented to her by Corey Lewandowski. You know what I mean? And okay, but they are legit questions. But I feel like I wanted to hear more questions about Kamala Harris's policies and intentions and views on certain things that are not part of the day-to-day Republican scandal talking point world. Right? Just ask her what's her feeling on gun violence in America, like that kind of stuff. It was almost like all the questions were really just a reaction to all the questions about Kamala Harris. And to your point, Maddie, I think she answered them terrifically. Yeah. I think she had an answer. My favorite moment was when Dana asked her about the "you're not really black" thing.
Oh yeah, she does
not play into that. She will not play into that.
Same old trope. Next question.
And the biggest takeaway that I saw, which was not only that she really was terrific at addressing immigration, Israel, the economy, but that I was watching her body language, brevity. She is a prosecutor. She made a career out of presenting what needs to be presented and nothing more. And I think that is a real skill. That's her strong suit. And I think it's going to bode really, really well for her throughout the rest of this campaign. And I saw that last night. That was clear. And so all the Republicans were out there going, where is she doing an interview? Like she has to do, what is she afraid of? Well, I think they got their answer, okay? Move on to your next bullshit talking point. The woman is brilliant. She's qualified. She knows how to get through a fucking interview without sounding like a 12-year-old lunatic like their guy, right?
Yeah, my big takeaway was, and not surprisingly, that she does her homework. She prepared for that interview and was ready for all those questions. And that's going to be interesting on September 10th when we see a debate where we know that Trump is not going to prepare for anything. It's just going to be all blob.
Yeah, I think he's met his match. I think Prosecutor Harris, Attorney General Harris is going to be on that stage like she's in a courtroom. And she's going to be in full control. And she's going to pull that mamala stuff like, excuse me, I'm talking. And I think we've seen over the years, Donald Trump, as much as he has disdain and disrespect for women in general, he also has a really bizarre respect for other women who he's intimidated by, like Maggie Haberman.
Not this one. Not this one at all.
I think he may pull his likely routine of interrupting, but I think the way she responds to it, just like she did at her rally when she said, I'm talking. That has a way of getting people under control very quickly.
I don't disagree with the fact that she'll know how to put him in his place. It's like the Kavanaugh moment. I have no doubt that she will take full control. But his lack of respect for her, I mean, forget about the fact that she's a woman, but that she's a woman of color, he still can't process that this is his opponent and that he appreciated Hillary at some level, right? Like, he has no respect for Kamala's
No, and he's also a racist.
At all.
So I agree with you that he has no respect for her, but I think he fears her.
Well, he should.
Do anything he doesn't.
And that's, I guess maybe that's my ultimate point, is that there's going to be fear on that stage.
Yeah.
Like, I ain't playing that game, Donnie.
If I had to guess, I think he'll pivot and attack ABC News for unfair questions or unfair not letting him speak long enough. It'll be a constant stream of like, that's an unfair question, or why are you cutting me off, or whatever kind of nonsense.
Yeah. Well, I hope they resolve the whole mic issue because I do think it's important that the mics remain on.
I would like to see that, but I not to see that they have any argument from the Trump side. But if that were that was the rules that was agreed upon originally, you can make an argument that stick to the rules that you asked for.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think victory or defeat hinges on that. I think it's certainly an advantage to her because the man has no impulse control.
No.
And that's good for Kamala Harris.
You'll see it in his face even if he can't speak.
But if he can't speak, it's not like he's going to be able to control his behavior. He did a little bit at the last debate, but there's no audience, and he's stupid when it comes to policy. And to your point, she does her homework, and to my point, she's in a courtroom at that moment, not on a stage. And so the advantages are still way in her favor. And he's going to look small, old, sweaty, panicked, empty-suited, and unqualified, unfit.
Angry.
Angry. And you know
Very
what?
Angry.
Anger is facial.
Yeah.
Anger is facial.
Yeah, he's gonna
he
look
could still try to interrupt. And, and there's a part of me that thinks it's almost even more valuable if someone's interrupting, but you can't hear them, and they have the anger on their face.
I agree.
Anyway, let's get to our winners and losers.
Andy, I've got Georgia on my mind.
Georgia.
You too?
Me too.
Oh my God. Okay.
Wow. Did you look at my notes?
I didn't look. I have my own notes.
Okay.
The whole night through.
My winner, Anita
Just
Tucker,
sweet
an election
song.
official in Forsyth County, Georgia, who has helped prevent thousands of lawfully registered voters from being stricken from the state's rolls. Loser, pro-Trump Georgia Election Board members who changed the rules to interfere with election integrity again in this key state.
This is bizarre because literally my winner is the same winner. It's
We
Anita
never-
Tucker, who served as a Democratic appointee in Forsyth County, and she spent 50 hours going to adjudicating challenges to voters. My loser is in Georgia as well, and that's basically democracy, because we just learned that Cobb County, Georgia, is installing panic buttons for election workers due to the, quote, severe increase in concern for election worker safety, unquote.
My winner, Kamala Harris, who shut Republicans up with a stellar performance in last night's much-anticipated CNN interview. My loser, Donald Trump, who yet again out-assholed himself with his reprehensible, illegal behavior at Arlington and his reposting of a disgusting, sexist, misogynist remark about blowjobs and Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton. Which brings us to the weekly rant. Okay, so the momentum in the presidential election has most definitely shifted to Kamala Harris now that she resides at the top of the ticket. There's been an appreciable swing from President Joe Biden's previous numbers to hers. She not only leads nationally in the head-to-head matchup, she's also beginning to pull ahead in all the critical swing states. I think she just maybe is in a statistical dead heat in Arizona. So perhaps a few weeks from now, this rant will prove moot. That said, this race is way too fucking close for comfort. Shockingly close. The fact that, as of this month, for the most part, it remains in a statistical dead heat says something truly awful about a good chunk of this country. Now, before I continue, I just want to state for the record, I love America. I'm a patriot, and I think we are the greatest nation in the world. But consider this. Donald Trump is a twice impeached, 4-time indicted, adjudicated rapist and fraud convicted felon who incited a deadly insurrection, tried to overturn an election, and stage a coup. And he's a cruel, bullying, pathologically lying sociopath who mocks the disabled, attacks Gold Star families, claims dead soldiers are suckers and losers, illegally films photo ops at Arlington National Cemetery and gets rebuked for it by the U.S. Army. And he will soon be sentenced in New York and is facing 3 other criminal trials and several civil trials. And it's a relative dead heat. Seriously? I still believe Trump is going to lose in November. And I also believe it could very well be a landslide. But sitting here at the end of August with these numbers indicating it's still this close, truly unfathomable. Too many Americans have completely lost their fucking minds. And I worry we'll never be able to put those crazy genies back in their bottles. All right, let's get to Andrew Weissmann. He is the co-host of the popular podcast Prosecuting Donald Trump and is a frequent legal analyst for NBC and MSNBC. He serves on the board of Just Security and writes frequently for it, as well as the New York Times, The Atlantic, and The Washington Post. From 2017 to 2019, Andrew served as a lead prosecutor in Robert S. Mueller's Special Counsel's office. His memoir about the Special Counsel investigation, Where Law Ends, Inside the Mueller Investigation, was a New York Times bestseller. He is also a professor of practice at New York University and teaches courses in national security and criminal procedure. He also served as the General Counsel for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and from 2002 to 2005, he served as the deputy and then the director of the Enron Task Force, where he supervised the prosecution of more than 30 individuals in connection with the company's collapse. And he was also a federal prosecutor for 15 years in the Eastern District of New York, where he served as the chief of the criminal division and prosecuted numerous members of the Colombo, Gambino, and Genovese families, including the bosses of the Colombo and Genovese families. Andrew, welcome into the back room.
Nice to be here.
So excited to have you here. I've really wanted you on this podcast for quite a while, so it's a real honor to finally get a chance to chat. So the last couple of months, everyone has been focused on politics, and it's been so eventful and so consequential that it almost feels like we've forgotten about Donald Trump's legal problems. And now it almost feels like the moment the convention ended, the legal landscape got really busy all of a sudden. So why don't we start with Special Counsel Jack Smith's superseding indictment this week in his federal J6 election interference case. In layman's terms, what are the material takeaways from that filing?
The material takeaways are that Jack Smith had to deal with two Supreme Court decisions that really affected how he could proceed in his case. They obviously delayed the case enormously. I don't think that was any accident. And substantively, he had to navigate those rulings because obviously that's now the law of the land, and he has to try and fit his allegations into those parameters. And so the same charges exist, but the way they were described and also the full panoply of proof where it had to be largely curtailed because of the Supreme Court decisions.
Mm-hmm. What those of us at home have been hoping for was this mini trial that was supposed to happen, which was going to sort of give us what we wanted, at least politically, before the election, even if it didn't mean all that much legally before the election in terms of having a trial start. So that's been put on the shelf, right? Jack Smith has made the decision that he's not going down that road. He's going to slow things down.
Well, we don't know. I mean, there's supposed to be a filing today that is a joint filing where the parties are supposed to tell Judge Chutkan, the district judge in the D.C. case, what their view is as to how to proceed. There is some reporting, I think, from Bloomberg that says that Jack Smith is thinking that he will not ask for the so-called mini trial, but that's just Bloomberg reporting. I presume that has come from the defense camp because Jack Smith has to talk to the defense camp about the joint filing. I think it sort of remains to be seen. I think it's very hard to imagine that Judge Chutkan will not have some factual hearing on at least some of the allegations. The issue will be the timing of it. But I think big picture for people, I mean, we are so looking at crumbs here.
Right.
I teach at NYU, and I think about sort of the American system of justice, how we compare to internationally, how other countries have dealt with criminality by their leaders, and other countries do a whole lot better than we do. So, countries that Donald Trump would look down on, South American countries, Brazil, Argentina, but also countries like France and Italy, all have managed to have timely trials of political leaders. And that's, to be clear, I'm not saying that there has to be a conviction. That's just a trial so that there will be a determination as to whether there is proof beyond a reasonable doubt that a jury can find. And we're sitting here going, oh, you know what? Wouldn't it be great if there was at least a mini trial so that some of the evidence would come out before the general election? I guess I have two responses. One is it's such a reflection of the fact that our system of justice cannot act quickly. And this sort of, I think, the corruption of the Supreme Court in fostering that. And the second is sort of putting that aside. We all can judge the proof ourselves. Yes, it would be nice to see it happen at a trial. It would be nice to see criminal accountability. But at least with respect to, let's say, the January 6th case, there were hearings on it, and we saw it with our own eyes. So we don't actually need the trial to be able to make a judgment about it. And just to go back where you started, which is, it seems like such an unreality that we're talking about one candidate who has been convicted and is also facing numerous criminal charges, amongst many, many other things you could talk about, including racism and sexism, xenophobia. And another candidate, regardless of what you think of her policies, is not any of that.
Well, this really raises an interesting issue because as a layperson, it's like my head is spinning over this stuff. Like there are so many and maybe this is Donald Trump's special sauce, is that the more you do, the easier it is to get away with it. But there's so many cases, so many motions, so many filings, so many appeals. And I often wonder, does the average Joe on the street get it? You know, working class people, the people that we're trying to win back in this party, do they get that distinction that you just made?
I guess there's a couple thoughts. One is there's no question that if you inundate people with, hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of lies, any one goes by the wayside, and it's easier to sort of ignore. And I think one of the challenges for somebody dealing with that is to sort of pick one or two, pick some emblematic ones so that you don't have that issue of this fire hose of things coming out. On the issue of, yes, there are 4 criminal cases. There are a lot of motions. One of the things that, I do a podcast with the great Mary McCord, where we actually are trying to break this down for people who are non-lawyers and even lawyers who are not criminal lawyers to give a place where we can just go through what is happening.
Congratulations, by the way, on your 100th episode.
Thank you so much. One of the things that is nice is that when somebody at MSNBC had the idea of doing that podcast, and I thought, that's crazy. There's no market for that. And what are you going to call the podcast? 2 nerds? I just thought this was not going to. And, so I was totally wrong. There actually is a desire for people to know the details. And it reminds me of when I was a trial lawyer. I mean, I think that jurors who are average citizens rise to the occasion. I actually do think people care. And if you know what, if you aren't showing that you care, then don't blame citizens for not caring. So, it's sort of the anti-poll. It's like you got to lead, not follow the polls. And I think, obviously I'm a lawyer. So for me, it's something that I care a lot about, which is the rule of law and justice in this country. But I think if you explain it to people, I think most people do. And obviously you can have different views on the facts and the quality of the proof and whether the cases would all have been brought if Donald Trump were not the former president. There are all sorts of issues there, but I do think that most Americans believe in the rule of law. They don't want to see the Justice Department becoming a political institution where the White House tells the Department of Justice who to prosecute and who not to prosecute. We lived through that already in the Trump administration, and so we don't have to speculate about what would happen in a Trump 2.0.
Well, I agree with you 100% when it comes to jurors, because we've seen in the last several years that they have done the right thing. The courts, with the exception of the Supreme Court, have also done the right thing in virtually every single case. Donald Trump has really not won anything. My concern, though,
except
is
Judge Cannon. I'll
right, and
Judge Cannon.
She's on my list. She's next, actually, on my list. But voters, I wonder about, because it comes back to that same thing where, like, us liberals, we sit around and talk about, saving democracy, and there's all this talk about the bus driver. He doesn't care about saving democracy. It's too nuanced for him. He cares about, A, prices and affordable housing. And I wonder if the litany of things you rolled off before in terms of distinctions between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, does that bus driver, does that school teacher who's just trying to get by, like, do people really understand those distinctions? Because if you look at where we are today in this election, although the momentum is moving in her direction quite appreciably, it's still kind of in that area of statistical dead heat. So the question that must be begged, like, a good chunk of this country, are they not getting just how evil he is and what a decent, qualified person she is?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have a different take on it. One, I think it's hard to just say what is the average every man or every woman thinking. Who knows? I mean, I'm not a pollster,
Right.
and I don't know that there is a answer to that for everyone. I also think you could sort of walk and chew gum. I mean, you can care about the price of your groceries, and you could also care about equal justice. I mean, and you can have both of those views, and you can weigh them, differently at different times. And I think the larger issue, which I don't have an answer for, which is how, why is the election close when you and I can look at the facts and go, this is an abnormal situation. I mean, it's not like we have a John McCain or a Mitt Romney on the other side where you'd have policy differences. And yeah, you might have minor differences about, this person was not candid about this or that fact. But we're really talking about, policy views, and you're not talking about the character of the person and just how unfit they are. And I think some of that really has to do with not that people who are, I mean, obviously there's a certain percentage that are of people who don't care about racism, sexism, xenophobia. I mean, matter of fact, might view those things as positives.
And they do.
We're talking, so, we obviously have examples of that, but that's there's a bell curve of that. But I think because, you have a problem of that it's so easy to be siloed, that I think a lot of people would turn to us and say, those aren't the facts. That when you don't have a core set of agreed upon facts, or at least the material facts, you can end up in this situation where somebody says, yes, I'm a Trump voter, and I just don't believe that this is what happened. Because that's not the information set that they're getting.
Right. Well, there's so much gaslighting that goes on. So let's talk about Florida and Judge Cannon. Jack Smith, he's urged a federal appeals court to reverse her dismissal of the classified documents case. Is that going to succeed, at least on some level, before it ultimately finds its way to the Supreme Court?
So that their position is what's the phrase that we use? A rock crusher. I mean, it is a devastating brief. It's beautifully presented. It reminds me, I remember once we were presenting a case and the facts were and the law was so strongly on our side. I remember saying we have to take out every adjective and adverb and just say what happened and then say what the law is, because and that's what they did here. It's devastating. This would be the third time that she is reversed by the 11th Circuit, which is a very conservative circuit in the United States. To me, the biggest issue is, I mean, obviously, look, if Trump wins, this case is over.
Right.
He will just tell his Department of Justice to drop it. The appeal will be over. Jack Smith will no longer be employed by the Department of Justice. So if Kamala Harris wins, there's at least a chance it will go forward. I think that this issue about whether he was properly appointed is just an absurdity, and she will get reversed on that. Plus, even if she weren't reversed, it's easily cured, because under her rationale, the problem is that Jack Smith didn't spend 1 second. If he had been appointed first within the Department of Justice, and then 1 second later became special counsel, that's legal, according to Judge Cannon. What was the problem was that you can't just say, I'm bringing you onto the Department of Justice to be the special counsel.
Right.
You had to have 1 second where you were first just a DOJ employee before you were a special counsel. I mean, by the way, there's zero support for that position. Zero. It's just, I mean, she is so political. And there's so many ways in which she is so bad for the judiciary, because she has made it completely relevant to repeatedly ask who appointed a judge. And that is so unfair there are a lot of judges who are appointed by Donald Trump who are really good judges who rule based on the facts and the law. And she is not one of them. And so she really tars everybody because of her actions. I think the key issue is going to be removing her from the case, if that eventually has to happen. She has so many ways that she can continue to not follow the facts and the law. And so even if she gets reversed here, if she stays on the case, one of the powers that a district judge has, which is very controversial, but it still is the case, is that once a trial starts and a jury is sworn and impaneled, a judge has unilateral authority under what's called Rule 29 to say that the government hasn't proved its case and to enter a judgment of acquittal. And that cannot be appealed. So if she were to do that, it's over.
So is this the writ of mandamus path that Jack Smith could pursue?
That is one of them. You could mandamus her. You could make a motion first in front of her to have her recuse herself, and then she'd have to write on it, and then you could appeal that to the 11th Circuit. The 11th Circuit on its own could remove her. The 11th Circuit could ask the government's position at oral argument. The 11th Circuit oral argument, by the way, on this issue will happen after the election. I actually think that's a good thing. One, obviously, if Donald Trump wins, it sort of becomes moot. But if he doesn't, it's a way to sort of deal with this issue, and for the 11th Circuit to deal with it in a lower political volume case, because you don't have the sort of the election pending at that point. And so presumably sometime in November or early December, the 11th Circuit will have oral argument on this, and it'll be interesting to see how it's handled. Obviously, we don't know the panel yet. There's a panel of 3 judges from the 11th Circuit. It's randomly chosen, and it's usually something that the parties only find out about a week or so beforehand.
And if you were a gambling man, the odds of her being removed ultimately?
That is really hard because the law is and should be very hard. You do not want the parties to just say, oh, I don't like the ruling, or I don't like the judge and I want a new judge. This is not the way our system works. But if she gets reversed for a third time, and it's not on issues that are debatable. I mean, the first 2 were categorical, fundamental errors. I mean, I just remember sort of being beside myself because it was so off the charts. And this is the same. That's the thing that makes me think that, I'm not going to give a percentage, but I actually think there's a pretty good chance. I've never heard of a judge being reversed 3 times in the same case on things that are this fundamental. And add to that she has, almost no experience for a case like this.
So let's move to New York. Yesterday, Trump and his legal team filed to move the hush money case to federal court. This comes 3 months after his conviction. What's behind that?
Delay. He's already done that. He in fact tried to remove the case once before, and this new motion is now back in front of that same judge. And you can see what Donald Trump is trying to do is figure out a way that if the trial judge, Judge Merchan, were to say on September 16th, which is the date that he has said he will issue a ruling, and deny his motion for a new trial or to dismiss the case, you have Donald Trump trying to figure out a way to be able to get a stay of that case so that he will not be sentenced on September 18th. And there's a lot of pending litigation about whether the 18th will go forward or not. If I were a betting person, I would say it is not going to go forward on the 18th.
Now, is that because Bragg has stated that he's not going to fight any delays?
I think in part. So Bragg has said that there is this issue about whether, because it's an immunity question, there is an open legal issue about whether that's sort of immediately appealable or not. It's pretty technical, and we've never been in this situation. And so that is an open issue as to, normally the rule is you go through your criminal case, you get sentenced, and then if you think there are errors, you raise it on appeal. You don't get to sort of constantly go to the appellate courts. An exception for that is if you're raising immunity or double jeopardy, where your fundamental claim is, I shouldn't even be here. I shouldn't be on trial. Either there was double jeopardy, I've been tried before, or I'm immune from prosecution. So the courts there say you can sort of go to the appellate court quickly. So I think with Bragg saying this is sort of an open issue and I'm not going to fight it, but I'm also not opposing what if the judge wants to go forward, sort of saying it's up to you, judge. That puts a lot of pressure on the judge. It certainly doesn't give him cover in the sense that you don't have Bragg saying, no, go forward and we can defend that. So there's that. And then no matter what Judge Merchan wants to do, even if he were to say, I'm going to go forward, I think you should be sentenced. And that doesn't mean he would go to jail immediately. Obviously, in so-called white collar cases, it's very common to not have the person go to jail immediately. See Steve Bannon, he was out for a very long time before he went to jail. So you could have a court such as the Supreme Court issue another stay. So I'm not sure it's going to get to that because Judge Merchan might just do it himself. But I do think that, again, we'll see what happens, but I suspect it won't go forward on the 18th. And which we just get back to our earlier discussion as a good example of, again, our justice system, really gets an F for being able to hold people to account. And, here's like a really good data point. The son of the sitting president of the United States has already been tried and convicted and is about to be tried again. And there wasn't this interminable delay, and the judicial system has gone forward and worked, and it's with respect to not just a Democrat, but the son of the sitting president. And that seems to happen, and you have the judiciary really not being able to deal with Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree with 99.9% of that. They dealt with Donald Trump very swiftly when it was regarding him having ballot access in Colorado. That they just whizzed out in 4 weeks. Then they had no
totally
problem.
Absolutely.
And so with regard to the Supreme Court, the immunity ruling, how shocked were you? And I guess my question is more from just like a fundamentally legal standpoint. How inappropriate was and is that ruling to you?
I totally blew it in terms of what I thought was going to happen. I could not believe that there were 5 votes for that decision. Just to go small bore for a second, for people who want to get into the weeds or sort of have the legal skills and interest, it's really interesting to read Amy Coney Barrett's concurrence. Mm-hmm. That actually seemed pretty right to me. I'm not 100% on board with it, but she was quite interesting because what she said, this is the part that I found very reasonable, which is when we're dealing with the very small number of issues where the Constitution of the United States has said that the president has exclusive and preclusive authority, sort of as a monopoly, such as who gets appointed to what positions, the pardon power, that Congress just doesn't have the power to legislate criminally or civilly because the Constitution has said this belongs to him any more than if Congress had said, you know what, we're going to be the commander in chief. Well, no, you're not, because the Constitution gives that to the executive. But she said that's a very small little area. So one of the crazy things about the decision was that the court said, oh, within that core function, we are going to include any conversations that the president has with the Department of Justice, including bringing sham investigations to stay in office, which is the allegation in the indictment. And the reason that the superseder doesn't have that in there is because there were more than 5 justices who said, nope, that's core. So that part's just unbelievable to me in terms of having a functioning democracy, that it's interpreted that broadly. And then there was just the policy view on sort of having this, at the very least, a very strong presumption of immunity for anything that the president does that in any way could be conceived of as official acts. And I just think that it's a policy decision. It is not in the Constitution. This is supposed to be an originalist court. And this was just their view of having a strong executive. I actually just was teaching the very famous Justice Jackson, not Ketanji Brown Jackson, but Robert Jackson, wrote a very famous concurrence in a case called Youngstown Steel, where Truman tried to take over the steel mills during the Korean War, saying that he needed the supply of steel in order to be commander-in-chief and carry out the war functions. And the court said no. And Robert Jackson, who people may remember was the lead prosecutor in the Nuremberg case, talked about the enormous rise in power of the presidency since the framing of the Constitution in the 18th century, talking about all the ways in which the Congress and the judiciary have sort of receded, how the presidency, because of a variety of things, including political parties' rise and the bully pulpit, and that it's a single person, has grown in stature. All of that is true, even more so today than it was when Robert Jackson was writing this during the Truman era. And all of that was cast aside by this Supreme Court without any recognition that they were really destroying this sort of Youngstown framework, which is something that we're all taught in law school as one of the great concurrences, because it was so thoughtful about the balance of power and checks and balances. And clearly what was in his mind was Hitler. He had just gone through the Nuremberg trials. And so he was really concerned about the rise of executive power and unchecked power. And there's for all of the discussion that the Chief Justice does in the Trump decision about the importance of a vigorous executive, there's no discussion of the counter. It's as if the history of the world is gone. And no recognition of, okay, now let's talk about, that's one side of the equation. Now let's talk about the other, and then how you do the balancing. That completely left out is the concern about checks and balances. And just to go to your question about, does the average person care? I do think the average person cares. I think people understand that they want checks and balances. A lot of times people don't want to see, for instance, the same political party control all branches of government because they think, you know what, that's probably not a good thing.
In our last minute or two here, you've had quite a varied, stellar legal career, academically included. You've been around a while. You've seen a lot.
That's your way of saying I'm old.
No, if you're old, I'm old.
True.
No, we're both young. In your wildest imagination, would you ever think that you'd see a Supreme Court this tainted, this conflicted, this corrupt as we see it today?
This goes to your question about how surprised I was. And the answer is I just did not think we'd be there. I have obviously witnessed certain of the justices engage in conduct outside of the court, and then even in their decisions that I personally viewed as not consistent with precedent, or sometimes just completely misstating the facts in the case, and that continued to be the case. But and that's shocking enough. What was concerning to me is I didn't think there were five. I didn't think that that would be the case for the Chief Justice. I didn't think that Justice Kavanaugh would go along with this. And as I said, I think the person to keep an eye out for is Amy Coney Barrett, who has, in a very famous one of the decisions, the Fisher case, she wrote the dissent. And it was beautifully reasoned and written. And as I mentioned, her concurrence, you sort of felt like that was something where she was trying to forge the majority opinion through it. And you read it and think that should have gotten the 5 votes. So yes, it is really shocking. I think it is appropriate that the current president has talked about various ways in which the Supreme Court could be reformed in an apolitical fashion. So one of the ideas is to have term limits, and to do it in a way that doesn't really help, clearly Democrats or Republicans. It's just an institutional reform, because we really have a problem.
And the Clarence Thomas type of scandals, the ethics violations, that all seems unprecedented, really unprecedented and dangerous.
Yeah, well, I mean, the only precedent you can think of is Abe Fortas, and that ended in a very different way. You don't have a code of conduct that's enforceable at the Supreme Court. That is something that members of Congress and President Biden have focused on. It is. I mean, Ketanji Brown Jackson, in one of the opinions that didn't directly deal with this, but dealt with sort of bribery, opened her dissent by saying, when public officials use their positions for private gain, it undermines our institutions. And it was pretty clear who she was talking about in that situation. I was in the government for over 20 years. You couldn't buy me a cup of coffee. Right. Every judge I know, it's hard to describe for people how incredible it is that you would do that. It's just unfathomable. So we have a huge problem, and the last place in this country where the view should be might makes right, which is, what are you going to do about it? You can't do anything about it. The might makes right. The last place you should hear that and have that view is in the Supreme Court of the United States.
Totally agree on that. My last question is not political or legal. It's a window into the soul question. Music is a great window into the soul. Give me your top 5 musical artists of all time.
Oh my God. Ella Fitzgerald is one. I'm like, I have very conservative tastes. Ari Melber always is referring to rap music, and right. I keep on telling him, like, if it happened after the 18th century, I'm out.
So Biggie Smalls is out for you.
Yeah, exactly. So, Ella Fitzgerald is one. There's a pianist named Uchida. I basically will listen to anything she has to play. I think I like every single piece that Franz Schubert has ever written, which is he's like a perfect bridge between classical music, sort of classicism, and romanticism. Like there's there's enough of each. So I'll go a little more contemporary. Stephen Sondheim, huge fan. have been for years. Even some of the things that are, what do they call them? Critically acclaimed, meaning sort of noble failures. So those are good. And then I think probably like Judy Collins. I think I've now sufficiently dated myself.
All right. Well, you made it into the 60s. Good for you. Andrew, this was great. I hope you'll come back. Certainly Trump is going to keep us all busy, legally, politically. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
All right, take care. It's time for this week's episode of Just Jeff. Welcome, Jeff. What's on your mind this week?
Oh, well, of course, everything that's going on with the presidential contest, and it's hard not to observe unless, of course, you don't have a TV or radio or access to the internet. But I have all of those. So I just want to say one thing first. I'm laughing. Okay. The first thing I want to say.
You want to share what you're laughing at, or do you just want to sit there and not seem like a crazy man?
One thing first that's kind of redundant. The first thing I want to say is that I am really shocked. You may have seen Senator Vance. He was talking about this, kerfuffle over the Arlington Cemetery thing,
right?
And he was complaining that he said that Harris was complaining about Trump being there. She never said anything about it, but he was so angry. He was all, and this is for public consumption, he was all set to really curse her out, and he controlled himself, and he, instead of using really bad word, he said Harris can go to hell. Mm-hmm. Now, I am saying that I've been following politics for a long time, but never have I ever heard one candidate running for president, vice president, telling the other candidate to go to hell. It's just disgraceful. Anyway, that is basically what I have to say, unless you have any question or comment for me.
Hey, sure. Dad, what did you think of the blowjob comment?
What?
Yeah, that's bad news. And plus, that was sanitized, but I heard. I don't understand. So I don't. I understand. So we're talking about both Kamala and Hillary. Mm-hmm. Of course, they were referring to Hillary's husband. Right. I don't think he was accusing Hillary of giving.
No, the statement was that blowjobs impacted both of these women in different ways in their lives.
Yeah. So I'd like to know what evidence is. What is he talking about with Kate?
Are you trying to make sense of Donald Trump?
Oh, he throws it out and see if it sticks. But if many of his what I call sycophants, they'll believe anything he says. So he just wants to get some, if he can peel away a few more, then why not?
Yeah, well, this is where we've come. Blowjobs. Anyway, as always, Jeff, we'll talk to you next week.
Great. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.